Hey everybody, Mary Fran Bontempo here. And before we get started with today's show, I just wanted to let you know that my new book, From Broken to Brilliant, How to Live a Brilliantly Resilient Life, is available on Amazon. Super excited about this book, which provides a roadmap of how to live a brilliantly resilient life. You'll get advice not only from me, but from so many dozens of our podcast guests who were kind enough to share their tips on how to reset, rise, and reveal your own brilliance. So head on over to Amazon, get a copy of the book From Broken to Brilliant, and now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you just visiting or are you going to live there? I'm Mary Fran Bontempo. Join me and let's learn how to come through those train wrecks, not broken, but brilliant. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. I have the brilliant Rita Ramakrishnan with me today. Rita is the founder of Exana Consulting, and Rita is focused on helping neurodivergent leaders to use their gifts as strategies at work. And I have a personal vested interest in this topic. So Rita, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to dig in.
So to reference what I was just talking about, I have two grandsons who are neurodivergent. And
Yeah.
I really want to get, when I first heard the term neurodivergent, all I could think of was those teen movies about Divergent that were out a number of years ago, and obviously a much different take on the topic, but also not that far off when you expand it. So let's just start with the basics. How did you get into this? And then let's talk about what neurodivergence actually means.
Yeah. I think my story probably resonates with a lot of women in particular,
Oh, for
for very
sure.
specific reasons. But I was diagnosed as neurodivergent later in life. So I got my first diagnosis, which was ADHD, severe ADHD, when I was in university. And it was one of those moments where once they sort of explained it, and I had the time to research it and understand it, I could look backwards and say, holy cannoli, all of these.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's why.
That's why, you know what I mean? I think for a lot of neurodivergent folks, you spend a lot of your life feeling like a square peg in a round hole.
Hmm.
Um, Things don't fit. Things that seem easy to other people are six times harder for you, and you have to put so much more effort in. And getting a diagnosis or getting some understanding around this is really helpful to put that into context. So that's sort of what got me initially interested. It was my own diagnosis, and I've since also been diagnosed as being on the spectrum. That's a more recent diagnosis. But I think for me, there is this emergence of what does this mean, not just for me, but for the other folks that are part of, a generation that went under the radar.
Oh,
The diagnostic criteria was originally based on behaviors observed in young boys. And so you saw a lot of the hyperactive presentations, for example, but it didn't look at what those behaviors could look like for kids, for women, sorry, for young girls, for women, what that could look like at an adult stage. It didn't look at the fact that women might overcompensate by
hmm.
trying to be a perfectionist or trying to please people. And so they can end up being extraordinarily successful, but it takes a toll. And so it started with my story, but then in engaging within the community, I just realized it was a very common story. And for me, there's a huge opportunity to help transform the way we talk about neurodivergence and help people really harness the strengths associated with it and live a more fulfilling and easier life.
Well, I find this completely fascinating because, as I told you, I have two grandsons who are neurodivergent, both diagnosed on the as autism spectrum, one with ADHD. My da my daughter has learned to have a bit of a sense of humor about it and says that they both have a touch of the tism, as she calls it, autism. But these are words that, for example, to my generation, no idea what any of that means. And sadly, when a lot of kids, that I grew up with and all that, I look back now and I think, oh my gosh. I look at these kids that were the problem kids in school and were, kind of marginalized because nobody knew what to do with them. And
Yeah.
consequently, these kids didn't really know what to do with themselves. So, first of all, the fact that you were the diagnosis part of this, I imagine it's obviously much more helpful for kids to be diagnosed younger with this. But how in the world did you make this transition then from into adulthood, into your adult world? Now, how did that diagnosis help you in terms of moving forward and thinking, okay, now I have the tools to figure out where I fit here and how I can use these things as possibly strengths?
Yeah. Um, so I think the diagnosis was a starting point.
Hmm.
And I'll get to this later as well. I think we actually just fundamentally need to change the way we talk about neurodivergence and the language associated with it. But let's start with the diagnosis. The diagnosis gave me a couple of things. It gave me more data on other things that might come up that I had maybe ascribed to myself as a personal failing or
Oh,
something I'm not good at, because that's a natural state for us. Um, and instead, I said, okay, these are just some, if I think about my brain as an operating system, it operates just a little bit differently here. So I like to think of most neurodivergence as, a person who enters the world, who experiences the world, has a series of inputs every day. You walk around, you have conversation, those are inputs. Your brain and your body processes those inputs, and then it makes meaning and drives outputs and decisions. The process, what you're actually getting as the inputs and the way you process those inputs looks a little bit different. And therefore, what you do with it is also going to be a little bit different than the average bear. And so for me, as an adult, one of the things I realized is regardless of, my neurodivergence, I've been quite successful. And that has been a lot of hard work and putting systems in place or sort of overcompensating in certain ways. And for me, having a community of other people who have navigated similar things gave me an opportunity to cross-pollinate ideas. So, hey, I'm experiencing this. Have you experienced this? What's working for you? Here's what's worked for me. And so you're kind of crowdsourcing ideas in a world where not enough work has been professionally done to think about how to help us be more successful. We're helping each other figure those things out and putting the right structures and tools in place. So that's one component. I want to go back to, the grandkids that you mentioned, and thinking about how we discuss neurodivergence and sort of trying to figure out what you do with those kids. And I do think we need to fundamentally alter the way in which we discuss neurodivergence. Because I think reality is everyone's got a touch of it in terms of the way in which we process, assuming that the way in which we process inputs and outputs is all largely similar, I think is a fallacy. And we're learning more about ourselves. We're learning more about the human brain. And so my sincere hope, my wish for the world is we stop talking about it as neurodivergence and pathologizing it. I think pathologizing and having diagnoses is helpful in terms of needing medication or additional treatment. But I want us to start talking about cognitive diversity. And I think the real win is if we can look at kids and say, let's actually just have a holistic view of how you process information, and what that looks like for you as you grow up, and therefore what your needs might be in order for you to be successful in the things you want to be successful in as a young person. What are the tools, support structures, and available resources that we can offer you that are customized more to the ways in which your brain operates, so you have every chance of being successful in the same way that everyone else does.
this conversation is fascinating to me already because of when you said the word failure, things that I saw as failures in myself. That's been, I think, the go-to for people. Oh, this kid doesn't do this right, air quotes around the word right. And not necessarily saying that it's a wrong thing, but at the same time, it's not typical.
Yeah.
It's not typical. And yet I've looked at these kids and I've watched them do certain things, and part of my head is going, this is genius. But it's not genius in the way, quote, normal, unquote, kids do certain things. So it's so refreshing and empowering for me to listen to you talk about these differences as potentially being strengths and getting them away from this idea of I can't do this the way other people do it, so it's a failure. That in and of itself is mind bending in terms of opening this conversation up, not only for, starting young. Obviously, this is already out there, so this is where your work comes in. Like, these people are working in companies and everything all over the place, and they're extraordinary, but they do things a little differently. So let's take advantage of that. But for me, again, knowing that the conversation is trickling down, that's huge. So, gosh, I have so many notes. I'm scribbling away here, there, and everywhere. One of the things that obviously I talk about with being brilliantly resilient is the resilience component, that neurodivergent people have such tremendous resilience, and I don't know that they even know they have it. So how has that component figured into all of this for you, and how does that work in the business world?
Yeah, I would say neurodivergence, in my opinion, looks different for a neurodivergent person. Sorry, resilience. Sorry, I might have garbled that. Resilience for a neurodivergent person looks different. I think the traditional definitions around resilience is a lot more focused on, bouncing back, um, responding to chaos, or unpredictability with a level of optimism and coming back to stasis. And
Right.
I think for neurodivergent person, it's not necessarily about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward,
Hmm.
right? And so it's saying the way in which I'm operating is not working for this scenario. So how do I stay resilient? Well, one, as a neurodivergent person, I think about us sometimes as like a computer. You have an operating system and the way things work, and sometimes you need additional software in order to compute things or operate in different ways. And you don't know what software is going to work. So as a neurodivergent person, resilience to me is being open to change and experimentation. Ultimately, the goal is to help you achieve success, achieve the things you determine as success, the things that you want to do with a higher level of ease. And so the conversation is, how might we do that? Are there tools, organizational supports, or shifts in conversations, or changes in ways of working that are going to be most supportive of you in in driving this success? And so we would try something. And sometimes it's sort of intrinsic and internal. It's a tool you put in your calendar or you start to integrate in your ways of working. And sometimes it's something that's bigger and broader within the context of the workplace, a fundamental shift in the way a team might operate. But you have to be open to experimentation. Sometimes it's throwing noodles at a wall and saying, how is this working right now? Okay, maybe this is not perfect, but let's iterate on this. And so that sort of sense of experimentation, that bouncing forward is let's try the next thing. Let's try the next thing. We may not have perfection now, and we may not have all the answers, and that's where the community component comes in. But to me, the resilient aspect of neurodivergence is one, acknowledging that you're not broken. We're not broken. We are brilliant in our own respect. I love my brain. I don't think it's something to be accommodated. I think it's something to be harnessed. And I have gifts that I want to offer the world, as do my clients, as do all neurodivergent people. And so, what we're solving for is how might we expand our impact and leverage our gifts in ways that are productive for us and the systems in which we operate with a level of ease. And
I
that requires change in that investment.
I think the thing that I see is actually a built-in resilience from the get-go with neurodivergent people because of the extraordinary efforts that they put in, and I'm seeing this in my grandkids, to fit in. And I
Yes.
think that that's something that we have to get away from, that they don't always have to fit in. But that being said, at the same time, there is a need for resilience every day, I think, with that mindset. So, in terms of looking at someone who's neurodivergent, to me, one of the main strengths is this resilience and this ability to go, take a deep breath. Okay, here we go. I'm back at it, and I'm not seeing it the way other people are seeing it, but let me get back at it. And that to me is extraordinary. There's an extraordinary ability to keep going in that
Yeah.
mind. Is that a strength that you see?
It is. It is to keep going. And the other component as well, you touched on a thing, which is you spend a big part of your life as kids, we need affinity, right? We need community, we need affinity to grow and to develop our social skills. And it's really hard for neurodivergent children to feel
Yes.
like they fit in.
Yes.
And so I would say one of the aspects of resilience that you cultivate is you have to get really comfortable with solitude. Um, you know, Jay Shetty wrote a book, I think it was called The Eight Rules of Love, and he sort of talks about solitude as a strength, right? Being able to cultivate a sense of self, a sense of preservation. You know yourself, you know your needs, you know how your body works, your brain works, and you're comfortable in those moments stepping away and being on your own, but then coming back to the group when it makes sense for you. That to me is also a form of resilience. You become quite self-sufficient over a period of time. Now, I'm not saying that means neurodivergent children shouldn't have friends, shouldn't be included. I think there's a lot that we can change in terms of our education system and the behaviors and strengths that we reward and how we elicit answers from kids in a classroom to support neurodivergent children. But as it relates to fitting in, yeah, I think that's also a component of that resilience, is that sense of self.
So I do see that to me this comes down to respect, and it comes down to respecting the needs of individuals, and that's like pretty much a blanket statement. Like we need to do more of that in general. But for this particular population, my 5-year-old grandson will say, I need some alone time, and he'll go up into his room and he'll, get out a book or whatever. And kudos to my daughter for recognizing this, who I might add is also has a master's in special education. So she was born to be the mother of these children, to my mind. But I do see the whole idea of respect as a really essential component across the board, just in general, but particularly in the workplace. These people, this neurodivergent group and people with autism and whatever you want to call it, they really have specific gifts that they can bring to a situation precisely because they see things differently. And to me, how often do you say step away from something and ask somebody else with new eyes? This is a whole new brain, not only just new eyes, this is a whole new brain. There's a measure of respect that we have to have for that, yes?
Yes. And neurodivergence looks different for everyone. The way in which it presents looks a little bit different. It's a different flavor for everyone, but there are patterns that we see, skill clusters that we can now associate oftentimes with neurodivergence. Things like enhanced pattern recognition. Again, when we think about those inputs and that processing, neurodivergent brains can oftentimes see patterns much faster than other people see patterns and can act upon those patterns or make inferences a lot more quickly. The second component is also that information processing speed, right? So oftentimes a neurodivergent brain might process information a lot faster. And again, that can help with decision making, but sometimes it's really challenging then because you have to move backwards and bring people along that journey. And that's a very important skill as well. That creativity as well, like alternative solutioning. Is often associated with neurodivergence. And there's a whole host of other things as well, beyond those pieces. But I think the way in which we often talk about neurodivergence is we use the term accommodation,
Hmm.
and there's an implied sense of charity associated with that. Like it's totally fine that you're weird and you're different, and we will accommodate that.
Yes.
And that's problematic for me because it's not about accommodation. I am bringing you something that you may not already have in the organization. My clients walk into work and they're quite senior, right? They're very senior. Um, and they've managed to work in ways that are right for everyone else, but they also have these gifts that are going to be transformative for your organization, can significantly make you more competitive, can bring you new knowledge or allow you to move with greater speed or see patterns or opportunities. And so this is not something to be tolerated. This is not something that you should feel like is charitable.
Mm.
Let's co-create ways of working so that I can use my strengths to support the organization to achieve more.
I
And
love
quite frankly, some of the quote unquote accommodations, some of the alterations that you can make in the workplace to help harness these strengths really help for everyone. So neurodivergent strategies sometimes are just helpful more broadly. And I think it behooves us to think about the rituals and norms that we put into place in organizations regardless of your neurodivergent population, and just say, we have more data on how people think and process information and how they work. We got 4 generations operating in the workplace right now. Let's just pause and reflect. Does this still serve us, or how might we do things differently?
I think the again the extension of all of this to the entire work culture is really important because let's face it, as you said earlier, everybody's brain works a little bit differently. My brain isn't the same as yours. It isn't the same as the person that would be the closest match to me in terms of my brain. Everybody's brain works a little bit differently. So respecting those differences to the point of of equal respect for everyone and not seeing it as something that needs to be, well, we have to make allowances for that. It's not making allowances, it's harnessing the strengths of everyone. That can elevate the entire organization. Now, I'm going to throw something at you because that said, I see my grandsons who, when they see and they recognize a pattern or a whatever, they are insistent to the point of, now they're kids, obviously, so they don't know the social, ramifications and how to approach certain things. But they can be really insistent on this is right, you're wrong, that's it. So how do organizations navigate the mind of someone who really does see what ultimately turns out to be right, but doesn't necessarily know how to get to here's what I'm seeing and how to tell someone else and how do we as non-neurodivergent people navigate that because there is a challenge in that.
Yeah. So I will say, I can understand when your grandkids are 5,
Yes,
that they're very insistent and they don't have better ways to sort of communicate or bring people along the journey or adjust their styles as necessary.
right.
See something that's right, they know it's right. It's objectively right when you look at all the data from their perspective. So why the heck don't you see it? But as adults, we have to think things like a neurodivergent person, as with everyone else, is going to have these sorts of challenges, and they can put strategies in place for themselves to address those challenges and partner with their organizations to say, when you see this, here's how we might reshape that together. Like, this is what I need from you, and this is what you should communicate to me, and this is how we'll work forward. Um, so one thing I'll say is a lot of it is self-regulation. So for example, with some of my neurotypical clients, they make their worst decisions when they're angry.
Mm. Emotion
And,
is so does emotion play a part? It has to play a part in this. I mean, obviously I see it with the kids because they're kids. But what part does emotion play in this? And I also want to say, and forgive me for cutting you off, but I also want to talk about how we, meaning the non-neurodivergent people, can ask questions that bring us all on the same page. So what part does emotion play in this?
Emotion is emotion plays a pretty big role, but the role it plays looks a little bit different for each neurodivergent person. I know that's a non-answer, but what I'll say is for folks who, in the case of your grandkids, I don't know what that's going to look like for them as adults,
Right.
but there are adults where, hey, I see this, you should all see this, you don't see this, and they're getting frustrated. So there's like an immediate emotional reaction because people don't see things the way you see things, right? The more senior you go up in an organization, the more work you need to put into yourself. All leaders, all executives need to have a greater sense of self-awareness and self-regulation. That's something you owe to yourself and the organizations you're in. That's not different for a neurodivergent person, but they have to explore that in slightly different ways. So in the same way, if I'm coaching a neurotypical client, one of the things we talk about is somatic awareness. You make bad decisions when you're angry. So sometimes you're not going to recognize you're angry. Let's talk about what happens in your body in those moments and like signals that you can take to know that you're in a red zone right now and you can step away from this. So for some of my clients, it's like, you feel heat coming up to your cheeks or you feel a tightness in your chest or your hands start sweating. Okay, cool. You have physical indicators. How might you check in with yourself?
Hmm.
It's not that different for a neurodivergent person who's sort of experiencing these things. What I will say, the caveat to that is some form of neurodivergence processes emotions differently. So in some situations, for example, a person will shut down their emotional centers. I,
Hmm.
for example, have delayed emotional processing. So a lot of times if something is crazy outside and around me, my body will just not process the emotion associated with that, and it will delay it to a later point. So, like at one point, I had to deal with a bomb threat at work, and everyone else is scared and kind of panicking. And my body says, no, 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 we don't have time for that right now. Like, let's get to business. You'll deal with this later. And sure enough, 3 days later, those feelings of panic and overwhelm sort of showed up. But in that moment, I could operate in these ways. So, some neurodivergent folks will process emotion a little bit differently. And again, when we're thinking about communication and how you engage with other people, that can have a significant impact. But the work to be done here is to acknowledge and learn more about yourself and understand how you operate in different circumstances so that you have choices. You have choices as an adult on how you want to approach that. Now, you asked a specific question. I want to pause and see if you want to take this a different way, but I also know you asked a question, which is how can neurotypical folks acknowledge and respond in these ways? Um,
In other words,
so
how are there questions that we can ask that says that basically are saying, Bring me on board here and help me understand." And maybe that's the
yeah,
simple question. Bring me on board and help me understand. I don't know.
yeah. So two words make a big difference, which is say more. Um, say more. Tell me more about this. There's clearly logic behind what you're saying. Help walk me through that formula and that logic because I'm not making that connection. Uh, and I don't know a neurodivergent person who's going to say, "Oh, you're saying that you want to listen to me. You want to hear my logic. You're not just disagreeing. You're open to the conversation. Great, let me jump in." I would also say sometimes you have to be a little bit flexible with the inputs and outputs. So I have a coaching client, very successful entrepreneur, and in our sessions, he's not super verbal. He's not as good with his words. So sometimes he's most comfortable like sketching things out as he's talking. And I might see something that he's drawing and I might ask a question about it and say, well, we're sort of talking about this, and that's kind of like an angry color that's happening. That's how I'm associating it. What's happening here for you? Like, where's this coming from? What does this signify to you? So I guess it's really operate from a place of curiosity, not judgment. Ask questions and leave room and space for them to go through their process with you.
Mm,
Because half of the time, all they want is to be understood.
I can vouch for that from my firsthand perspective. Now, you said you wanted to take the conversation in a slightly different, move off somewhere else, or was that
No, no,
part of
no. That was the
that
piece
was
is
the
I
that was
sure
the
that was still where you wanted to go and you didn't want to take it elsewhere.
So this is actually right in this moment a part of being aware of where the other person is coming from, and as you said, very simply just expressing curiosity. Like, I'm not quite following you. Tell me how you're getting there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really beautiful way to approach it because again, I see the brilliance in these children. I also see the brilliance in people in the workplace currently with that different mindset. And I'm so appreciative of you and your work for shining a light on this and allowing the rest of us to see that we're missing something by not encouraging neurodivergent people to tell us what they're seeing and thinking and to work with them to really build strong organizations and strong communities and strong families and all of this because there is a place for that brilliance. And I've seen it, like I said, with little kids. So I can only imagine with the skills that you amass as an adult, how this can affect the world.
Yeah. My sincere hope is by the time your grandkids are in the workplace, things are going to look really different for them. Um, and, accommodation won't be part of the conversation. And their gifts are going to be truly valued as gifts and harnessed in the right ways, and that they're going to live happy and productive lives.
Well, you are my new icon for this. So I sincerely appreciate your work, your attitude, your way of conveying all this. My heart is full with hope for all of us that we can finally look to the differences in each other and see them as the gifts that they really have the potential to be and recognize that for all of us. So, Rita, do me this has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm going to actually I have to have you back at some point because this is too important to squeeze into one episode. But leave me with something, leave us all with something, and then tell everybody else where they can learn more about you.
Hmm.
What's your Here, as you said, actually, what you said about the hope for my grandkids, but if there's one thing that you could say to the corporate world at this moment, what would that be?
The best definition of happiness that I've ever read, heard, or seen is that it sits at the intersection of peacefulness and productivity.
Hmm.
And what I want to leave us with is I think in the corporate world, we're so focused on productivity and we're so focused on productivity in one way. We have one definition for it. And so, what I want to, the thought I want to leave this conversation with is this thought of peacefulness. So, what does it look like to be both productive and peaceful? How do you help people operate in ways that are productive under their terms as well, but also give them that sense of I can bring my whole self to work. I can be my whole self. And that's a good thing. That's a great thing. And I'm at peace with it. And so that's my sincere hope is we can start to explore that peacefulness aspect a bit more. And I think that's going to be incredibly supportive, not just for our neurodivergent friends in the workplace, but also for everyone.
I so appreciate that. Where can we learn more about you?
Sure. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So I'm also doing a master's right now at Penn focused on this area, and I like to publish quite a bit. So um, feel free to hop on there, but otherwise, www.ixana.com.
Rita, this has been honestly, I this has been such an enlightening, wonderful conversation. I'm so appreciative. Everybody, please look up Rita, and all of her brilliance will be in my brilliance bit when it comes out with our show notes when this episode airs. Rita will be a part of that brilliance, and we will be happy to share that with everybody. If you do need a little bit more, head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net. Do sign up for the brilliance bit. As I said, Rita will be a part of that, and we will see you all next time on the next episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Join our Facebook group and follow us on YouTube to be inspired with tools to reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance.